On All Saints' Day, my mind goes to an extraordinary trip I took to France. At the end of the first year of my studies in Rome, all the men, I should say, were required to stay in Europe because they found that if you go back to the United States after just that long a school year, you end up wanting to stay there, and in fact often do stay there. So we had to stay. So I had about 7 to 10 days, something like that, before my studies on Latin in Ireland began for the summer. So I decided to take a trip to France by myself without knowing the language, although it has some significant similarity with Italian, which I also did not know very well. It's hard to imagine doing that these days with the terrible tragedies over there. It was a different time. I organized my trip basically around the shrines of saints. So I flew into Lyon, which is the culinary capital of the world. My first choice did not match that, but afterwards it was quite good. I visited first the grave of Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, a bishop, ancient saint, born in 130. He was a student of St. Polycarp, who himself was a student of St. John, the evangelist, the apostle. His shrine was indiscreet, unadorned. It was more like a cave with a barred door on it, which was locked, unfortunately. It's the only one like that. I'll return to him at the end, but here's a quote of his. "Error never shows itself in its naked reality in order not to be discovered. On the contrary, it dresses elegantly so that the unwary may be led to believe that it is more truthful than truth itself. Error disguises itself to trick us." From Lyon, I went to the village of Ars, a little village. It was one of my favorite stops, largely because it was not commercialized like so many of the other places were. Ars was the village to which John Vianney was sent. That was his only assignment as parish priest. He's the patron saint of parish priests. Beautiful place. His body remains intact. It's behind glass, and you can still see it. He lived in the 1800s. I showed this to the kindergarten the other day, and I think it was a first for them. It was a good talk. In the church hangs many crutches and canes. The church there is composed of the old church in which he ministered and a new one that's connected to it, built in his honor. And the old one hangs all these crutches and canes from the many people that journeyed from all over to be healed by him, and left their canes and crutches there and went on their way. From Ars, I went to Lourdes to pay my respects to Our Lady, who appeared to St. Bernadette there numerous times. Asked her to drink from this stream, which was but mud, and she dug and got a little water, and eventually a church was built there, and millions of pilgrims have visited there to drink some of that water and to be bathed in it like I was, many of whom have been healed. From there, I journeyed further south to Toulouse, to the shrine of St. Thomas Aquinas, very simple. He provided an extraordinary synthesis of faith and reason. They don't conflict because they're from the same source. Faith and reason both come from God. I believe it was in Toulouse, if I recall correctly, that I received a recommendation from a Frenchman to make sure I visit this place called Mont Saint-Michel, which was clear across the country. And in fact, it was off the northern coast of France. You could access it through a land bridge that was opened up when the tide went out. It was basically a rock with a monastery at the top and a town that had been built around it. It's an extraordinary sight. And there I went to the hallowed ground of Normandy, paid respects to so many of our patriots who've given the great sacrifice. And then to Lisieux to visit the tomb, the shrine of St. Therese, a little flower, whose little way has become so popular, doing little things with great love, and then to Paris, to Notre Dame, and to the Louvre to say hi to the Mona Lisa. It was an extraordinary trip. Saint Irenaeus is important, especially because of his witness to the value of apostolic succession at such an early date, the succession, the continuity between churches all the way back to the apostles. In his best known, most important work called Against Heresies, Against False Teachings, he asked this question. He said, "Suppose there arise a dispute relative to some important question among us. Should we not have recourse to the most ancient churches with which the apostles held constant intercourse and learn from them what is certain and clear in regard to the present question?" If you have a question you're uncertain about, how do you find the answer? Well, it makes sense to go to the churches that were founded by the apostles or connected with them. But he said, there's not enough space in this little book to trace the successions of all the churches. So he said, let's just trace that tradition derived from the apostles of the very great, the very ancient, and universally known church founded and organized at Rome by the two most glorious apostles, Peter and Paul. The blessed apostles, then, having founded and built up the church, committed into the hands of Linus the office of the episcopate, that is, of being a bishop. From Linus, there came Anacletus, and after him is Clement. And he said, this man, as he had seen the blessed apostles and had been conversant with them, might be said to have the preaching of the apostles still echoing in his ears. After Clement came Evaristus, after him Alexander, then Sixtus, then Telephorus, then Hyginus, then Pius, then Anicetus, then Soter, and then Eleutherus, who does now, in the 12th place from the apostles, hold the inheritance of the episcopate, the office of bishop. In this order and by this succession, the church tradition from the apostles and the preaching of the truth have come down to us. And this is most abundant proof that there is one and the same vivifying faith which has been preserved in the church from the apostles until now and handed down in truth. Something like the importance of having your hand connected to your body. You may have the Bible, but without a connection to the apostles, well, it's more of a historical book that's not alive. It's clear that from early on, great importance was attached to churches connected with the apostles in general, and specifically with the church in Rome. Gradually, what are called curial offices developed to assist the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, in his unique mission. These offices are responsible for the specific areas of the church, like mission work or liturgy or doctrine. On occasion, they produce documents, some of which the Pope personally approves to give them more weight. Now, papal documents have a sliding scale of authority, and even within a document, some teachings carry greater weight than others. Some require belief by every Catholic, some are put forward for consideration. The documents in order from greatest authority to least run like this: apostolic exhortation, encyclical, apostolic letters, common declaration, apostolic constitution, homilies, message, discourse, motu proprio. Now, the purpose of these is to help maintain and advance the integrity of the teachings handed down by the apostles and their successors. As you can see, the Pope is very different than a president with a platform, for example. The greater the authority, the greater the adherence. Joseph Ratzinger, long before he was named Pope, kind of put it like this: papal teachings that can be seen spread out more diffusely over space and time require greater adherence. If there's a teaching that you can't find spread out over space and time, then it requires less or little adherence. Now, Pope Francis has recently been in the news for his comments in an interview. Maybe you noticed this. The lines that caught attention were, homosexuals have a right to be a part of a family. They're children of God and have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or be made miserable because of it. You should not disinherit your children if they have homosexual inclinations. You must respect them, but remember, respect goes both ways. Then he said this: What we have to create is a civil union law. That way they are legally covered. Perhaps you also noticed in the list of official papal documents having authority that interviews were nowhere to be found. That's because they have no official authority. Clearly, that doesn't mean that they don't have any impact, but they're not part of what is called the magisterium of the church and have no binding force on Catholics. I believe the Pope has a special place in his heart for the poor and the sick and those who feel alienated. He is tender and he is shrewd, which I think shows itself in the way he broached this topic in an interview devoid of papal authority. For a pope is not a president who can propose or impose a new platform and contradict the deposit of the faith, but is bound by it like you and I are. For example, he is bound by this document approved by John Paul II in 2003, which would have been communicated to Francis and all the world's bishops, which says in part, "The Church teaches that respect for homosexual persons cannot lead in any way to approval of homosexual behavior or to legal recognition of homosexual unions. The common good requires that laws recognize, promote, and protect marriage as the basis of the family, the primary unit of society. Legal recognition of homosexual unions or placing them on the same level as marriage would mean not only the approval of deviant behavior, but the consequence of making it a model in present-day society. And that would also obscure basic values which belong to the common inheritance of humanity. The Church cannot fail to defend these values for the good of men and women and for the good of society itself." Even more significantly, Pope Francis and we are bound by the words John Paul II spoke in response to a decision by the European Parliament. This is lengthy, but where else are you going to hear it? And it's only in Italian and Spanish online. Listen. "We have entered into Lent 1994, the year of the family. Unfortunately, precisely in this year of the family, initiatives spread by a notable part of the mass media, which in their substance are anti-family, must be noted. They are initiatives that give priority to whatever it decides regarding the breakdown of families and the defeat of the human being, man, woman, or children. Indeed, what is really bad is called good. Separations, marital separations, decided lightly, marital infidelities, not only tolerated, but even exalted, divorces, and free love are sometimes proposed as models to be imitated. Who benefits from this propaganda? From what sources is it born? Every good tree, says Jesus, bears good fruit, and every bad tree bears bad fruit. It is therefore a bad tree that humanity carries within itself, cultivating it with the help of huge financial expense and the support of the powerful mass media. I now turn to the recent and well-known resolution passed by the European Parliament. It has not wanted to simply defend people with homosexual tendencies, rejecting unfair discrimination with respect to them. On this, the Church also agrees, moreover, and supports it, makes it its own, since every human person is worthy of respect. What is not morally admissible is the legal approval of homosexual practice. Being understanding of those who sin, those who are not able to free themselves from this tendency, does not in fact mean diminishing the demands of the moral norm. Christ forgave the adulterous woman, saving her from stoning, but at the same time he told her, "Go, and from now on sin no more." I say this with great sadness because we all have great respect for the European community, the European Parliament. We know the many merits of this institution, but we must say that with that resolution of the European Parliament, the intention was to legitimize a moral disorder. Parliament has unduly conferred institutional value on deviant behavior, not in accordance with God's plan. There are weaknesses, we know this, but Parliament, by doing this, has supported the weaknesses of man. It has not recognized that the true right of man is victory over himself, to live in accordance with right conscience. Without the fundamental awareness of moral norms, human life and the dignity of man are exposed to decay and destruction. Forgetting the words of Christ, the truth will set you free, an attempt has been made to propose to the inhabitants of our continent moral evil, deviation, a certain slavery as a way of liberation, falsifying the essence of the family. The bond of two men or two women cannot constitute a true family. Much less can the right to adopt children deprived of a family be identified with that union. These children are seriously harmed because in this alternate family, they do not find a father and mother, but rather two fathers or two mothers. We trust that the parliaments of the countries of Europe will know how to distance themselves on this point and, on the occasion of the Year of the Family, will protect the families of ancient societies and nations from this fundamental danger. But there is no doubt that we are in the presence of a terrible temptation. The first Sunday of Lent reminds us of Christ who has come face to face with the eternal tempter of man and has conquered him, a victory that announced the Easter triumph through the cross and the resurrection. Christ tells us Christians, us inhabitants of Europe and the world, that this type of evil cannot be overcome if it is not through prayer and fasting. Yes, we cannot defeat this evil, this threat in any other way. The only instances to which we can appeal or to a right and healthy conscience and the sense of responsibility of the nations, which must not allow the family to be destroyed because the future of each one of us depends on it. That clearly expresses how he understood things, how important, how substantial. These are just a couple of the many times this topic has been officially discussed, from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the previous popes, all the way back to Leviticus in the Old Testament and the story of Sodom, always with the distinction in church teaching between people with same-sex attraction, which is not sinful, and acting on that attraction, which is. Here's St. Paul. Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Don't be deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor practicing homosexuals, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revelers, nor robbers will inherit the kingdom of God. To propose, support, and enact legislation which protects and provides legal benefits to the greedy, for example, is ipso facto encouraging greed and holding it up as worthy of imitation. This is why in the same document that John Paul II approved, he told Catholic politicians were told that they must oppose legislation supporting civil unions. Now, part of the reason this topic has become so difficult for us is because the terms love and marriage have largely been stripped of their meaning. Here's St. Paul on love. And this is my prayer, that your love may increase ever more and more in knowledge and every kind of perception, to discern what is of value, so that you may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ for the glory and praise of God. Love is not simply a passion which carries with it the right to indulge it, to find satisfaction, but it's connected with the knowledge of what is good and what is not, what is valuable and what is not. And here there is overlap with Plato's summary of the purpose of education, to teach the student to love that which is truly lovable and to hate that which is truly hateable. Now, this is helpful, I believe, for the painful task of a parent helping a child with same-sex attraction. And for marriage, well, marriage now is largely understood as a mere association which endures as long as two people find the arrangement advantageous and pleasurable, often calling that combination love. On what grounds, it is now asked, should same-sex people be denied this? On the same grounds that birth control is denied by the church to heterosexual married people. For the principal end of the sexual urge which propels a man to a woman and a woman to a man has as its primary purpose procreation. Birth control, like homosexual acts, reject God's purpose, which was articulated in Genesis and confirmed by Jesus. When using birth control, the couple does not collaborate with God's plan and goal. Intercourse is then used according to the person's own purpose. which relegates the other person to an object useful to achieve that end. Instead of two people bound together by their jointly willed service of God's plan, which is written into their bodies and is the substance of the one flesh union, their relationship is reduced to something of their own creation, as permanent as it is useful. It's no wonder popular opinion has shifted so much on homosexual marriage, since the true nature of marriage is largely misunderstood. Error never shows itself in its naked reality in order not to be discovered. On the contrary, it dresses elegantly so that the unwary may be led to believe that it is more truthful than truth itself. Friends, this is a homily I never envisioned having to give. It's a type of homily I don't like to give because there is so much obstructing so many hearts and ears from hearing. It's a little bit like discussing advanced calculus in an algebra class. But the Pope has thrust this upon us, and I do have the Lord's words in Ezekiel about preachers and those of St. Gregory ringing in my ears. To paraphrase, what good is a preacher who is silent when he should speak? He is like a dog that doesn't bark when there's danger. He should be taken out back and shot. Okay, I added that last part. Ezekiel says his life is forfeited. And while Paul's rebuke of Peter set a precedent of the possibility of correcting a pope, I have chosen not to criticize him, but to allow the saints, Paul, Irenaeus, and John Paul II, to speak to you and assist you in forming your conscience. On All Saints' Day, the final goal and ultimate purpose of mankind is presented to us from the book of Revelation. Worship of God with the Lamb by the ones who have survived the time of great distress. The purpose is presented, as is the path those worshiping must take. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. How do you wash your robes in blood and make them white? Well, blood's a symbol of life. Robes are a symbol of your lives. You wash your lives in the life of Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Or St. Paul put it, clothe yourself in Christ. In the words of St. Paul, my dear family, this is my appeal to you by the mercies of God. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Worship like this brings your mind into line with God's. What's more, don't let yourselves be squeezed into the shape dictated by the present age. Instead, be transformed by the renewing of your minds so that you can work out what God's will is, what is good, acceptable, and complete. The logic is the same as with sexuality. The end, the purpose, God's plan, indicates the way of life which is in harmony with our great call. May we never forget our purpose or lack the courage to seek it.